Hello, everybody. This is Matt Harris, and welcome to my first podcast. This is our first voyage in the podcast of Varato realm, and we're going to go on a journey with this podcast, and we're going to hopefully learn a lot of things, and I'm hopefully going to get more comfortable doing this. We're going to bring more people in to talk to and have some dialogue, but basically, I wanted to start off with the first podcast to explain what it is, who it is, and why it is. And I'm going to start off by just saying this is something that I've been thinking about for a few years. And maybe I'll start off with a little bit about, if we're going to talk about who, I'll talk about who I am and what kind of brought me to this place. I have been in the digital world for about almost 30 years. I started, actually, I think if you go back to my first job, real office job, I was a cook in high school and college. So my first office job after I quit cooking was in a agency called Wieden & Kennedy. And I was hired by them via a not-for-profit company called the American Indian College Fund. And just out of luck, pure luck, really, I was given the opportunity to help grow this not-for-profit through the amazing agency of Wieden & Kennedy. And this was in the early 90s. And I was tasked with reaching out to a list of media companies to see if they would air these ads that the Wieden & Kennedy had been put together for the American Indian College Fund. So this was in the early 90s, like 1992, 1993. And what I would do is call people on the phone and say, hey, you have a radio station, would you play this ad? Because they're required by law to play some, not-for-profit ads in certain spots throughout the day and the week. And television is also required, public television. So it was really kind of a game of getting your spot out there, and you're kind of competing against other not-for-profits for those spaces. So essentially what I did, not knowing at the time what it was, is I created a repository of every media company in America, radio stations, television stations, and print companies, magazines and newspapers, and I organized them in a single system, and then I would create values with each one in terms of which ones I thought might be most important to contact first. And then if I got a positive response, I would prioritize it even higher, and if I got a negative response, I would de-emphasize it. So essentially what I was building is a CRM. Not knowing it at the time, I was building a CRM in FileMaker in 1992. So I was essentially creating a data set of contacts, organizing them, prioritizing them, and then doing repeated outreach, which for anybody working today sounds like logical, easy peasy stuff. But at the time, I don't even know if people knew what a CRM was. People were doing work like this, but they didn't really call it. Salesforce didn't exist. So I kind of just got lucky and started working in this space early. And then in the 1995, I moved to New York City, got a job as an animator and starting to do animations. And I learned, Illustrator and Photoshop. We were doing essentially a version of hand animations, but then scanning them and digitizing them and creating the equivalent of kind of a manual process, even though we were using Illustrator and Photoshop. So that was my first job in New York City. I'd moved to New York City to try to, with my wife, my now wife, my girlfriend at the time, and just tried to survive essentially in New York. And after that animation job was done, which I got very, very lucky to get that job, I asked them what else they had for me to do. And they said, do you know HTML? And I was like, I don't know what that is, but I'll go home and learn it. And this was in 1995. So there wasn't a lot of web. People really didn't know what the web was. A lot of people thought that it was kind of a fad. The internet was a fad. Websites were a fad. But I was one of those guys with an art degree, didn't really know where I was going with my career. I knew I wasn't going to be a fine artist. I was kind of realistic in that. But I thought, what the heck, I'll learn and I'll figure it out. And I got hired, and my career just kind of took off. I think I was one of those people that understood things pretty quickly. I was a fast learner. I was particularly a fast learner if I could do it myself. So if you put something in front of me and said, solve this problem, I was someone that could just dig in and solve the problem. So I was a good fit for the industry. And again, I got very lucky. So around the mid to late 90s, my career took off. I ended up working for Radical Media in New York City. That was the company that hired me as an animator and then hired me as a digital producer, a front-end digital producer at the time, or a front-end engineer was called. Information architect was also a label. But I was essentially kind of doing all of it, soup to nuts, graphics to digital front-end engineering to digital back-end engineering. I connected a database to a website during that time period. I worked on this incredible project for IBM, another one for Xerox, another one for the Museum of Modern Art. I just flourished. The industry took off. I kind of took off with it, and I went for this ride, and I didn't know it was coming. It was kind of a shock to me, actually. But it's another one of those examples of how, there's jobs that were going to be available in the future that we don't even know exist today. And this was me stepping into an industry, just happening to be in New York City because my girlfriend took me there. Happened to be in a production company that was kind of, driving forward in this industry, and businesses that were willing to pay for this work. And I just got super lucky. And so, roll the clock forward 30 years. I went out on my own. I was an independent developer for a few years, worked on Gateway Computers website in the late 90s, which was at the time one of the biggest e-commerce sites in the world. Started my own agency in New York City in early 2000, late 1999, 2000 during Y2K, survived Y2K. I built a Flash agency, if people know what that is. And of course, Flash died and I had to restructure it. But anyway, after a couple of iterations of an agency, I'm where I am now with Harris WebWorks, focused on B2B e-commerce, with essentially a lot of history and some battle scars, and learning how to do things the right way and learning even more from doing things the wrong way. So with all of that history in mind and kind of looking back and reflecting on my career, I've decided that there's a need for to build a community around thought leadership as it applies to the evolution of businesses. So, technology is a cornerstone of business. New technologies can disrupt businesses, and those two things are intertwined. Business and technology are basically intertwined. And as technology evolves, businesses evolve, and vice versa. So businesses will drive new technologies, and then those technologies will disrupt industries, and you have to kind of conform to these evolutionary phases. And a lot of times businesses are in their silos, doing what they do, what they've learned to do, and they've been very successful for a couple generations, or a couple decades, I should say, not a couple generations, maybe 2 decades, and then there's a disruption. And so what Varato is essentially, it's a community of business owners, professionals, and technology partners and thought leaders that are getting together and sharing ideas. I'm going to be the kind of originator of this, but I think it's going to flow out from me and hopefully expand well beyond me. That's the goal. But it's, again, getting together and sharing ideas. So what it is, it's a community of content, events, and networking. So basically, it's people coming together to share their stories, share their ideas, meet other people, and learn from them, and to prepare for what's to come. And so basically, who we are is, business owners, professional service providers, technology partners, and thought leaders. That's the who. What we do is we create content, create community content and events and networking. And the why is really the larger thing. So that's what I'm going to get into now. The bigger part of this is the why. And I told you my history, so I'm going to get into a little bit more of like what I see as the historical perspective on the why. So in a nutshell, the why is because stories and shared knowledge strengthen business and communities. That's why we do it. Now, the bigger picture of why that's important is to talk about essentially the evolution of business and how each generation of businesses and business ownerships will have to change. They're going to live through some kind of disruption, and the disruptions are happening now as much as ever, potentially more than ever, and potentially faster than ever. But the disruptions have always happened, and that's kind of one of the points I'd like to make when you take this into a historical perspective. So my strong belief is that when you understand the past, you're better prepared to predict the future. We can't. None of us has a crystal ball, but understanding where we've come from will give you a sense of a pattern. And when you can start to visualize that pattern, you can anticipate perhaps what will come next, or a good educated guess on what might happen next. And so the stories of successes and failures are essentially that past that we're looking at to see what might work in the future. And these are hopefully give people the keys to how they can evolve their businesses to stay relevant, profitable, and grow. And then I want to talk about in the podcast, big picture stuff, why we're doing this. We're going to talk about generational shifts, and we're going to talk about a succession planning, and how businesses will need to survive from one generation to the next to stay relevant. And how essentially those businesses are, we're talking about regional businesses here, by the way. The large enterprises, the corporations, the public companies, they have their own consulting firms. They have their own networking groups. They have plenty of benefits. They've got their lobbyists in Washington. They have all the help they need, or they should. What I'm talking about is regional businesses that don't have access to that, and they don't have that leverage to change laws, and they don't have the resources of, blue chip consulting firms coming in and helping them. I'm talking about small to medium-sized, mid-market regional businesses. Those are the businesses that Varato is going to try to help. We will be helping. So if you look at a business like that, they're typically owned by a family. And one person can only drive that business for about 30 years. That's about as much gas as they're going to have in the tank. They have a little bit more than that, but if you think about a generation in terms of business and people, there's about 3 generations in a century. So if you break a century up into 3 chunks, you're probably going to be impacted by one of those chunks, and you might, bridge the gap. But just think about breaking it up. So a 30-year business can help a community, but a 60-year-old business can help a community even more, because there'll be employees coming and staying and making it through to the next generation of leadership, right? But what we want to build is 100-year businesses. We want to build 200-year businesses. And that requires an adaptability and a mindset of growth that is surpassing what that first generation of the founder can bring to the table. And that is something that I think is worth talking about. And those stories are worth hearing, because I think if we build strong regional businesses, we're going to build strong, sustainable regional communities. And so that's really what this is all about. To me, at the core of Varato is, how do you build and sustain strong regional communities that are not reliant necessarily on huge corporations coming in and employing a third of the people. And I think we're at a place now with technology where there can be really strong small businesses. We're at a point where technology can be adapted by smaller businesses at a rate that they couldn't before, and that creates a lot of opportunities. So whereas a large company and a corporate company or a private company will have access to consultants to help them, they're not necessarily agile or nimble. It's a big ship that's hard to turn. Whereas a small company with the right information can make dramatic changes quickly and can find opportunities that exist and leverage those opportunities in a way that a corporation can't. So there's definitely advantages to being a small, medium-sized regional business, as long as you're empowered with the information and the knowledge. So again, that's kind of what Varato is doing. And in terms of the generational change, I just want to end with a description of last century, because I think this is a really interesting thing to look at. You break last century into three thirds. The first third, we were transitioning from farming to manufacturing. That's a major change. It's a major change in how we organize ourselves as human beings. It's a major change in how we do trade. It's a major change in economics. It's a massive cultural and social change. In addition, we survived World War I, and we went through the Great Depression. That's just in the first third of the century. In the second third of the century, we survived and fought in World War II, and the USA became an emerging global military and manufacturing superpower. That we were not that in the first part of the century. We became that in the second third of the century. And it was the beginning of globalization. So, there had always been global trade, but not at the same capacity and rate and scale of last century, particularly the last 2/3 of last century. And then if you look at just the last third of last century, the internet, it created a massive change in how we do business and how we, again, organize ourselves. There's the internet, mobile phones, and the digital revolution. So all of that happened in the last third of last century, and it created massive opportunities. I would say, the biggest companies in America right now, the five big ones, if I have it right, basically started in the last 25 years. So you have some of the biggest, most important businesses in the world that didn't even exist at all in the first 2/3 of last century. So again, a massive change in just where the dollars go, who gets employed, how they work, and what they do. The last third of last century changed all of that again, massively. So if you think about you're a business, or you're a regional business, those are disruptions that are really hard to get through. It's really hard to evolve your business from, farming to manufacturing, and then manufacturing to globalization. That had a really big impact on a lot of businesses. And then the internet put a lot of businesses out of work because it disrupted what they had been doing. People changed the way they bought things, and a business that was thriving in the middle part of the century died in the third third of the century, excuse me. So again, we're not even done with the first third of this century. The 21st century has already seen massive disruptions, obviously. And those disruptions are going to continue. But we're also at a phase where I think there's an agility we have. There's particularly small businesses to leverage technology, and there's a nimbleness, and there's a kind of inheritance of technologies that had been a generation ago prohibitively expensive that are now available to everybody. So it's really about changing a mindset, a business mindset, in terms of the way we do things now, the way we make money now, the way we can profit now may not be the way that we make money and profit in the future. Probably won't be. So how do we build a community around sharing what's coming, sharing what's working, and helping those businesses thrive and succeed in a world that's evolving very fast, and get access to information and best practices that the corporations already have, but we're going to share them and build thought leadership in our own way, in our own community, through our own content. And that's essentially what Varato is. What Varato is, it's empowerment through community content, networking, and partners to embolden a small and medium-sized regional business community to thrive. And it gets people out of their silos. I want to kind of break the habit of people staying in their businesses and not looking outside and looking at their competition or trends. The one thing that we can count on is that change will happen. That's the one known. That's the thing that you can bet on. What that looks like, we don't know, but we can learn. And I think that there's a lot to be said about getting together and sharing those ideas, and not necessarily protecting everything we know. I think there's a lot to be had for being more open. I'm a big advocate of open source software, huge advocate of open source software. And open source software, if anything, has proven that community-based creation of software can outpace and outlast private software, corporate software. You just look at the internet. The internet runs primarily on open source software, which is a crazy concept if you think about it. It's volunteers running probably one of the most important pieces of infrastructure the globe has. People are doing it for free. They're committing code for free, and it works. If you think about that concept for a second, you realize that there's something revolutionary there that we could tap into, and it's worth talking about. How is that different? It's dramatically different. Think about this. My most trusted source of information is Wikipedia. It's community-based. It's free. People just want to contribute. They want to get involved. And everybody benefits from that. The whole world benefits from that. So basically, that's what Varato is. Let's get together. Let's share ideas. Let's be open. And hopefully everyone that's involved will benefit in some way. Some ways directly, some ways indirectly. Osmosis. It'll sink in. But essentially, that's what Varato is. And that's why I've started it. And I'm hoping to kick it off, put my energy into it. But I'm hoping other people can come in and contribute. We're going to do 2 events this year in person. Our office is in Woodbridge, Connecticut, just outside of New Haven, Connecticut. And there'll be more information about those events on the website and in the podcast. We're having one in June, June 20th. We're going to have another one in October. And then starting next year, we're going to try to do at least 4 a year. We're going to try to podcast once a week. We'll be bringing in thought leadership to be involved in the podcast with us, to also present at these events. And then we'll also bring in technology leaders to talk about their technology, businesses to talk about their experiences and case studies. So that's basically what it is. It's about community, and it's about information and networking and thought leadership. I hope that does a good job of explaining it. I hope that I didn't bore the hell out of you with this podcast. I promise to get good at this, or as good as I can. I promise to get better, and I hope to make it interesting, and I hope that people follow it, and I hope it helps people. Mostly, I hope it helps people beyond everything. If I get better at it, then I'll be better at helping people and helping people learn. So that's the goal. That's what Varato is. Tune in, and I hope you enjoy it.